President Muhammadu Buhari, in an exclusive interview with international news outfit Bloomberg, stated that his administration will be leaving Nigeria's economy better than he met it in 2015 when he assumed office. Now, according to the president, the vast infrastructure development and policies by the Monetary Authority has set the country on course for sustainable and equitable growth, adding that his successor will inherit a far more resilient economy due to the investment key sectors have also received so far, thereby bolstering local production. Meanwhile, economic analysts have faulted the economic policies of the president's speech, stating that the reality is at variance with the claims of the president. Well, joining me now to discuss the state of the Nigerian economy as we speak today and other macroeconomic challenges, I have with me the Chief Executive Officer of the Center for the Promotion of Private Enterprises, Dr. Muda Yusuf. Thank you very much for joining us on the show this afternoon, Dr. Yusuf.
Thank you very much, David.
Now, let's start off, sir, with this president's statement, on the economic performance of Nigeria now at a better place. This conversation really is one of the biggest ones we have to have, because we're looking at the fact that we are having the Buhari administration gradually draw the curtain to an end to this administration and setting the pace for a new government to come into place. But an analysis of key economic indices today, how valid would you say the president's statement are true and verifiable? Let's take a look at inflation, which has consistently risen. Capital and recurrent expenditure ratio, it has just been the same old pattern we've seen over time. Our debt levels reaching alarming rates. Exchange rate volatility is also one of the biggest issues we have to face. Unemployment, the distribution of natural resources, the list goes on and on. What's your assessment of the president's speech?
Well, the President's statement to Bloomberg, was a kind of self-assessment of the performance of the economy under his administration. Well, to some extent, some of the points he made are valid. I mean, particularly with respect to what the government has done with regard to strengthening development finance. I think that for me is one major thing. There may be issues with the quality of the intervention by the CBN. There may be issues with the issues of the high rate of default with some of those lending. But, I mean, we have to also admit that it has some impacts that are positive, particularly on some major manufacturers who are able to access those funds. But beyond that, many of the other macroeconomic indicators are not looking good at all. Some of the factors may be domestic, some of them also external. But the bottom line is that the macroeconomic situation today is much worse than what it was in 2015. Just as you said, if you look at the key indicators, take inflation, for instance. Currently, inflation is at 17.71. And let me also say that even the official inflation data understates the severity of the problem. I'm talking about the challenge of inflation. Because the inflation data covers quite a broad range of products, some of which are critical, some of which are not so critical to the survival of the average Nigerian. But we take the products, the basket of products that the average Nigerian consumes, I'll be talking of inflation that is well over 50% for most of the products, particularly those basic items around food and around maybe health products and around transportation and energy. So the inflation situation has been extremely bad. Of course, some people argue that it's a global phenomenon, but again, there are also local factors that has aggravated some of these inflation conditions. And serious, severe inflation has very serious adverse effects on businesses, on investments, and on the welfare of the people, which is why the World Bank was talking about many more people going into poverty, abject poverty, as a result of the surging inflation. So that is it for inflation. Then for the exchange rate, again, it's not a very good story to tell. The exchange rate has been one of the biggest challenges that the manufacturers and even practically all investors in the economy have been complaining about. Again, there's a global dimension to the challenge. There's also a domestic dimension to the challenge. But inflation, the exchange rate depreciation remains a very, very big problem. It has created a whole lot of distortions in the economy. It has caused some businesses to even go under. It has affected profit margins. It has led to an elevation of or escalation of cost of production, cost of distribution, and even the capacity of many businesses to create jobs. And the distortions within the foreign exchange market itself has also created a major problem with regards to investment inflows into the economy. Whether we are talking about foreign portfolio flows or even foreign direct investment. Because the structure of policy now is such that it's suppressing supply and encouraging demand. It's boosting demand and suppressing supply, which is a direct opposite of what exactly we need to do. So in the foreign exchange space, I think we have done very, very badly or very, very poorly. Even though this argument by the CBN, which was endorsed by the president, that these are all homegrown economic management models. Yes, we may call it homegrown, but if the homegrown model is not working, I think we need to admit. I don't see anything wrong with some standard economic policy principles. Of course, it's not in all cases that these policies work, but we need to establish properly that there's a failure of a particular kind of policy before we make the statement that some of these ideas from the IMF and World Bank are entirely not correct. I don't think so. It's not all the time that the policies are bad. Policy prescriptions around the foreign exchange markets, I think, is something that we need to review very, very strongly. We cannot continue to run an economy where we have a disparity in rates of close to 180 naira on the dollar. It's a recipe for a lot of problems in the economy. It's a major incentive for round tripping. It leads to complete misallocation of resources. It creates a lot of transparency problem and even corruption in the entire ecosystem of our foreign exchange management. Then, of course, you have the issue of the energy. The energy situation has never been this bad. It has, for a very long time, it has never been this bad. Where the cost of diesel is now over 800 naira per liter, where we are having frequent collapse of the grid. And you need energy to power an economy. You need energy for production. You need energy for distribution. And even from the welfare point of view, for you to sleep well and wake up well and be refreshed, we also need some energy at least to make the households a bit more comfortable. All of these variables are not in a very good shape at all. Because of this energy crisis, a lot of businesses are struggling to survive now. Some of them have suspended production. Many of them have scaled down their production. Profitability has been affected because as costs are increasing, many of these producers cannot pass on the cost to their consumers. So they have the choice either to continue to make losses or to just suspend production. So the energy situation is a major challenge. And of course, we have other policy issues around our debt management, our fiscal deficits, many of which are also creating very serious macroeconomic challenges. So just as I said, some of these things are as a consequence of some developments in the global scene, but quite a number of them are also a consequence of inappropriate domestic policies and actions.
Dr. Yusuf, talking about our domestic policies and our actions now, let's also look at the penchant of government when it comes to borrowing. It is quite an interesting situation at the end of the day that when you look at solutions bringing profit, we're not necessarily seeing government take all of these cues here and there and implement such. This is highlighted in the DMO's latest report for the first quarter of this year, that our debt service bill has risen to about 109% for just the first quarter of this year. How much of a setback or backlog do you think this consistent rise, take this singular element of debt profile, will likely slow the tempo of economic performance and the new government, which will come into bear come 2023, in their drive for revenue generation once they assume office, really?
Well, the issue of the debt profile, first, let me also admit that we had some legacy debts. And what I mean by legacy debts are debts that were inherited by this administration. Then we also have the component of debt that were incurred by the present administration. But the reality is that we are seeing the ballooning of debt profile. Because even when we were talking about the challenges of revenue, expenditure keeps ballooning. The current expenditure continues to go up. So that has been compounding the problem. Because when there are revenue challenges, I think the ideal thing to do is to begin to rein in on expenditure, to cost spending and all of that. But unfortunately, there is no indication that that has happened. From all the reports, all the figures we see that it's spending as usual. It's expenditure as usual. And that is why the debt situation seems to have been worsening. All the efforts about cutting the cost of governance has not achieved much results. So because of that, year in, year out, we have seen a widening gap between revenue and costs. We have seen dramatic growth in fiscal deficit, which of course is resulting in this huge debt burden. So the debt situation is of concern, and this concern has also been highlighted by some of these international financial institutions, because the percentage of our revenue that we now use to service debt is getting increasingly high. It's high and it's also increasing. As at November last year, at least from the data that was supplied by the finance minister, it was 76%. Right now, with all the challenges and the way we have actually loaded additional expenditure into the budget, particularly the subsidy budget addition, the supplementary appropriation for subsidy, we are likely to see a situation where the debt service to revenue could rise up to 80 or 90%. So it's a major dilemma for economic management, for the macroeconomic stability. And I think the way to deal with this is to see what kind of urgent reforms that can take place. But unfortunately, because of the season we are in, I'm talking of the political season, it is difficult for the government at this time to undertake any major reforms. So we are likely to continue to go through this, until the elections in 2023. And some of the areas of policy that we have thought will have been modified easily, particularly the Forex policy. There seems to be very strong rigidity around it, especially now with the endorsement of the president that the kind of foreign exchange policy we are adopting it's an indigenous model of economic management, in spite of all the problems and the challenges that it's creating. Otherwise, that could have been an easy way to be able to get a lot more inflows into the economy and strengthen the supply side in our international trade process and within the framework even of our balance of payment equation. Because if you had a more liberal exchange rate regime, we are likely to see a lot more capital inflows. I mean, look at the data on our capital importation has been declining sharply. It's not so much because there are no opportunities in this economy. It's because we have a defective Forex policy, which is making it difficult for foreign exchange to flow into the economy, which is why a lot of people have been saying that we need to pursue this policy of convergence. And if you take even the National Development Plan, which was recently approved by the Federal Executive Council, it is contained there that one of the major macroeconomic priorities is for us to pursue the convergence of rates, exchange rates in the economy. So you have that in a national policy document, and yet we are talking about this homegrown economic management model, which is completely at variance with what is contained in the National Development Plan. So I think we need to tidy up our policy process. We need to engage more deeply and consult the right people so that we can get some more quality inputs into the policy formulation process.
Dr. Yusuf, wrapping up our conversation now, let's talk about how disappointing it is that we've not yet necessarily gotten to that point where we work with data. Take, for example, the population centers. We are yet to achieve that. You look at initiatives such as the Treasury Single Account to help mop up leakages in our financial system. However, we still have issues of corruption raising their ugly heads. Now, the president also prides himself in how much is put in towards the fight against insecurity, but the state of insecurity keeps on expanding beyond the northern belt of the country to the southern and eastern part of the country. Now, with this whole ball of issues that we have to deal with, for the polity and the business community, as momentum continues to build up towards the 2023 elections, what do you think are those critical elements to hold the next political actors who intend to take on the reign of government to account? The president has always made mention of economic stability, fighting corruption, and also dealing with insecurity. But there are a whole lot of counter responses to that. So for the business community and then the voting populace, what's your word to us right now?
Well, for the incoming administration, whichever party it is, what we expect to see is the creation of an environment that will encourage and support private investment. Because when we talk about the growth of an economy, it is essentially about how we're able to drive investment, how we're able to grow investment. Because it is through investment that you can grow the economy. It's by growing the economy that you can create jobs. So what we expect is for an urgent review of some of the policy impediments to private investment. I will locate that within the context of our Forex policy, within the context of our monetary policy, within the context of our trade policy. Because trade policy is also a very critical element that drives economic recovery and growth. But we don't give much attention to it. Unfortunately, every time we are talking about trade policy, there is so much focus on how much revenue can be generated by the customs. Whereas trade policy is much more than that. Trade policy can bring a lot more, can have a lot more impact into economic recovery and economic progress. So we need to deal with that and have a very good investment-friendly trade policy. We need to define the boundaries of regulators. A situation where one regulator will be crossing boundaries into another territory and all of that, where monetary policy will be stretching to fiscal policy, all those things have to stop. It doesn't help the economy. Then of course the regulatory environment, we also need to deal with it. We have a situation where practically all the regulatory institutions have turned themselves into revenue generating agencies. Revenue generation has now gained a greater priority, a bigger priority in the affairs of many of these regulatory agencies. And unfortunately, even the National Assembly doesn't help matters. Each time they are meeting them, what they're asking them is about how they can meet revenue targets. Sometimes they're even reviewing the targets upward, as if the economy is just about revenue. Of course, we need revenue, but you need to generate revenue within a framework that is sustainable, not pushing people to go and generate revenue in a way that they now make life difficult for investors, life difficult for those who are creating the jobs. And if the environment is conducive for these investors, invariably, their investments will grow, they will make more profits, and they're able to give more revenue. But all this idea of chasing everybody to go and look for revenue is creating a whole lot of problem for investors. Right from the point of the gate of international trade. I'm talking of import and export. We should be looking more at revenue from those who are already investing, from the profit they are making, from the company tax, from the VAT and all of that, rather than killing the investment even right from the very beginning. So we need to assess and audit, do a proper review of the role of the regulatory agencies. Then we need to look at the totality of the structure of our fiscal operations. How are we allocating our revenue?
Okay,
How are we
Dr.
ensuring that we invest more in our infrastructure than in running the affairs of government? Right now, the whole thing is lopsided. We spend so much money now on running the affairs of government.
Exactly.
And the way things are going, we will get a situation where almost 80 or 90% of government will be spent entirely on recurrent expenditure.
Dr. Yusuf.
So all of these things are things that we need to, and more importantly, we need to quickly reform our oil and gas sector. The lack of reforming that sector is part of the problems that we are facing, part of the thing that has led to the energy crisis that we have. Also, reforming the oil and gas sector is also very, very critical. And we need to do that very urgently. We already have the PIA, the Petroleum Industry Act. We need to activate the implementation very, very quickly in an accelerated manner.
Yes, Dr. Yusuf, we'll have to leave the conversation here. It is way too big a conversation to have for just one session, but we'll definitely keep tabs on all of the developments that will play up until the next general elections and when the next government also takes the reign of power. Thank you once more, Dr. Muhammadu Yusuf, for your time on the show this afternoon.
Thank you very much.